Interview with Mary O'Connor. Hi everyone, I am Michaela. This is Mary O'Connor.
Hello.
Yeah, so we're doing an interview. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask these questions.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really happy to have the chance. So
I'm
thank
really
you.
excited. Alright, so let's start with the basics. Why do you want to be mayor of Winona?
Okay, well, as you know, I've been mayor for 3 terms.
Yes.
So the reason I'm running again this time is because I've gotten a lot of things accomplished, but there's a couple things that are still out there that I'd like to make sure get wrapped up. One of which is the master planning process for San Damiano, which is, I'm kind of leading that process, and that's slated to be done December of 2023, hopefully. I suppose it could be a month or two later than that, so I'd like to see that through. And then we've done a lot of planning for a public safety building, and we're planning to go to referendum in a year about that, and for an increase in operating expenses. So I have a lot of experience with referendums, and I really want to make sure that gets accomplished.
Yeah.
So those are the main reasons I'm running again.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that you lead San Damiano Park project. Can you clarify what you mean by leading it?
Well, we have I've appointed a steering committee of community residents who are overseeing the planning process.
Got it.
And we've hired a consulting firm, an engineering landscaping firm that's actually doing the planning, but
Yes.
I'm chair of the committee, of the steering
okay.
committee, and the steering committee is kind of overseeing the process. So
All right, yeah, thank you for clarifying
you're welcome.
that. And then my second question is, to be a valuable leader, one must be a good team player, right? So my question is, how do you plan to balance delegating tasks yet retaining responsibility?
Well, that's a good question. I am well known for having a very collaborative leadership style. In fact, I've had one long-term council member tell me that I was the most collaborative mayor they'd ever worked with. So I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or what, that I tend to be more that way, but so when I'm working with city staff and we're working on anything in particular, I ask them, there are certain things I ask them to do, and if there's decisions I have to make, and usually they're coming to me about the decisions, so I'm gathering information and talk to everybody that I can to make sure I know all the angles of everything. And so they all have their responsibilities, but then ultimately the decision is mine.
Yeah.
And the mayor, there aren't always easy decisions, but the mayor is ultimately responsible, so that's part of the job.
Yeah.
But I like to make sure I work with everyone to have their input.
Of course, yeah, I like that idea. And you mentioned that you being a woman, you are the first woman to be mayor
That
of
is
Winona,
true.
correct?
That is true.
Okay, yeah, so that does kind of put a nice spin since the whole previous. I remember being in high school, I believe, and I was so rooting for you because I was like, yes, a woman.
It is pretty exciting.
So yeah, that actually did make a difference in my life as being a resident growing up here.
Great. That's great to hear. Yeah. I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, you should be.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the next thing is in 2021, from my understanding, Winona gained a new asset called San Damiano Park. And from my understanding, we are entering the master plan, the master phase, I believe it's called, and it's going to end in December of 2023. Now, my question is, how do you ensure that all of the research and feedback that we've gotten doesn't get lost in the finalization of the development?
Okay, that's a good question too. Yes, we bought San Damiano. We actually closed on it about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
That is an accomplishment that I'm very proud of. And we've always intended to do a master planning process. So the community has input into what is going to happen there. So our first goal, and the city working with the Friends of San Damiano, which is a group that was formed, they're doing a lot of fundraising. In fact, they fundraised for the entire cost of the master planning process.
Okay.
But they're doing a lot of work there to help get people to come and visit. So the city and the Friends have worked together we've had a big goal from the beginning of making sure people have opportunities to get on the property, because so many people, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and said, I've lived here my whole life and I always wanted to go on that property, but I never felt like I could, and so we've had, I think, over 20 events that either jointly or separately, the two groups have sponsored, and just things that people have come to. Like, I don't know if you went to either of the beer gardens this summer, but there were over 1,000 people at each of those,
Wow.
which is pretty amazing. And they've had a lot of smaller events too, the Snow State Games with the Ho Chunk last February, that type of thing. And then we've also had a lot of house tours of the house, I think, and that is something else. We've had over 1,000 people attend those tours. We generally do them in small groups of 10 to 15 people, and I've actually conducted some of them. There's several people who have been trained to act as tour guides to tell a little bit about the history of the house, and I don't know if you've taken one, but you should. It's really fascinating. So people have come they've looked at the house. I think a lot of people just go up there and sit and watch the lake, or bring a book, or maybe they're on a bike ride and stop by. And we've got a lot of, Jake Anderson, our park director, right after we closed on it, made sure that there were a lot of picnic tables and Adirondack chairs there. And it's very peaceful and contemplative for the most part, except during the beer gardens. Obviously there's a lot more people. But so anyway, we've had a lot of people come and visit the property, and then we started the master planning process last July or so, and I appointed a steering committee of community residents and city officials. There's some representatives from the Friends, there's some people who are on city committees. We've got some representative from the Ho Chunk Nation and a representative from the school district, and a variety of people who all have some, like somebody from the Landmarks Commission, because the house is a Monona landmark.
Yeah.
People with different areas of expertise or experience in some of the properties. So, but they've been and then we hired a company called MSA, which is a local Madison planning firm.
Okay.
And they do park planning and a lot of different event planning, or not event planning, but different public space planning. So they've been kind of doing the work, and then the committee has been giving them advice, telling them what we'd like, giving our input. So in October, we conducted a big survey of just asking a lot of questions where people could give their input about what they'd like to see at San Damiano. And we, as part of that, and this is something we haven't done too often in the city because it's not cheap, but we sent out a postcard to every household telling people about the survey, and we kept it open for about 3 weeks, and really in all the other city communication channels, announcing it, and making sure that people knew about it. And we had a pretty high return rate for a survey of that type. I think we had about 1,600 responses, which is great. And so we've taken that input. We did a public input session at the high school. I think that was towards the end of October. A lot of people came to give their input there. We've had different focus groups. So we've gathered a lot of information. In our last steering committee meeting, we kind of went over a lot of that information and talked about basically 3 concepts that we would like MSA, the consultant, to come up with some initial drawings of possibilities of what could be done there. And the idea is that we will bring those to another public meeting. And this kind of depends on how far they get done with how far along they are with the plans at our next meeting, but it will either be in March or April. And we'll be publicizing that again to people.
Got it.
And and we'll be letting them see the plans ahead of time too, so they're not just seeing them for the first time at the meeting. But, and I think there's gonna be another survey associated with that, getting people's thoughts about that. So after that, then they'll might decide, I imagine, to focus more on one plan, depending on what people have said, and then more refining of that plan, and then we're going to do another public input meeting after that. So I think we're doing everything we can to hear from the public.
Really thorough to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, so we're hoping.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a periodic response.
Mm-hmm.
And with the beer garden, you're saying that 1,000 people came?
That's what they estimated twice. There were 2 of them last summer. We had music, and they had food trucks, and all behind the house there. It was both for beautiful evenings, and
Wow.
Yeah,
And
it's really,
I'm just amazed by that number because there's about 9,000 or 8,000 people in Monona.
right, there's about
So that's
8,600.
about 10%
Yeah,
in one area.
right, of course, yeah. Of course, not all of them were from Monona, there are
No,
people from
that's
the east side of
true,
Madison,
that's
but you're
true.
right, that
Yeah.
was about 10% of the,
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
yeah.
That's like mind blowing.
Yeah.
For me at least.
yeah, it was
Um,
something.
Yeah. You should be proud.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, the whole city, not just you.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's a collaboration.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah.
really great.
So I want to move into diversity.
Mhm.
So as a community, we do strive for diversity and equal opportunities.
Right,
But given to the fact that Monona is predominantly white,
that is true.
and really obviously, with that being said, what are your ideas or goals or strategies to have Monona as a community to be more inclusive and more welcoming of like different cultures and backgrounds?
Yep. And as you're right, this is definitely an issue, and has become very apparent over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So 2.5 years ago, we had some incidents during the summer that led to us contracting with the Nehemiah Corporation to advise and consult with the city on things we can do to help make Monona more welcoming, help
Yeah.
people in Monona kind of think about their perceptions of diversity and equity. And, I think a lot of this is things people haven't really thought about very
No.
deeply because it is what it is.
Yeah.
So Nehemiah they've done a lot of work internally in City Hall with city staff. They meet periodically with city staff. They meet with the council. We have paid for quite a few staff members and council members to take their Black History for a New Day class, which is an excellent class. And Nehemiah comes from their perspective is that they think you have to know how this situation developed in order to change it. So that's why they have this history class. And to help people understand that. So they've been doing, a lot of discussions after seeing parts of the class and that kind of thing. They worked with us when we were hiring the new police chief, which very helpful there. And we really, expanded our search beyond our typical places that we might have posted the job and that kind of thing. And we're really happy with Chief Cheney. He's been great. So they've done that within City Hall. Then about, a year ago last summer, I appointed an ad hoc committee on diversity and equity issues in Monona. And the charge to that committee was coming up with suggestions on how to make Monona more welcoming and inclusive. And that was a very diverse committee that I appointed of 9 people. It took a while to put it together, but they really came together and did a great job. And they met twice a month for I guess it was all told probably 9 or 10 months. So it was a very focused, quick process.
Yeah, rapid.
And they came up with a report that they released in June, which is on the city website, with some background and numbers. It's about 35 pages. It's it's a really good report about the situation in Monona, and then they had a whole series of recommendations. Really low-hanging fruit, things that are going to take a long time, that they thought the city should try to do at least some of them. And they recommended that I appoint an implementation committee to prioritize those suggestions and help, accomplish some of them. So I did that. I appointed the committee in sometime this fall. I can't even remember, October, November, I think. They just had their first meeting this week, actually. That's also, I think, 9 people. It includes an alder. It includes a couple people who are on the original committee, but then several new people. Some of them from the Monona Art Group, these anti-racism circles that a local group had just formed on their own, and they were interested in what further things they could do. They wanted to, be able to take some action besides learning more about things. So some of them are on it. And that's facilitated by Nehemiah as well. And Nehemiah facilitated the first committee as well. So, and they've been great with helping, just people think about different things and whatever. So that committee is now going to come up with some ideas for how to implement these recommendations, and they there's all kinds of suggestions, things like having some of the official city documents and brochures and things in Spanish, but then there's also evaluating all the city policies to make sure that aren't any issues of bias or whatever. Well, we have thousands of pages of policy. That's a long-term project. I'm not saying it's not important, but
No.
and we actually have reviewed and revised all of our police department policies in the last year.
Okay.
Somewhat with that in mind, they also really needed just some work on reorganizing and updating some things, and we're doing the same thing with fire department policies
Okay.
right now as well. So that's kind of the kind of things we've been doing, and then like the library has been doing a lot of programming around equity issues. I know, so some different groups are doing their own thing too. But a lot of this, the city can do things certainly, but a lot of this really has to come from the community. A lot of it is changing people's hearts and minds, and we can't flip a switch and have that happen.
No.
So I think as we see, more diverse population coming here, if we have some programs and things that encourage, people to see different cultures and that kind of thing, that'll help. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
Well,
And one other thing, I have really worked to try to increase the diversity of city committees. I think a lot of people think all city committees are all older white men, and that is certainly not true. I've made new appointments, probably about 2/3 of the people who were on committees when I started either have dropped off for their own reasons or, just for the most part, that's what's happened. Stepped down, and in looking for replacements, I've added a lot more women. I've added some people of color, added, high school. We have a high school student. I mean, just a bigger variety of people on those committees. So, and that's something I keep trying to work on. So
you have a high school student on the committee?
She's on our community media committee.
Oh,
Yeah.
how cool.
Yeah.
That is such a good idea.
Yeah, and of course, that's a great committee to have a high school student on because they're very involved with the TV station, and some of them are getting involved with the radio station, WVMO.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Yeah, I like that you're doing intergenerational.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
That is so smart.
Great.
Okay. And my next one is, you kind of touched base on this, but as a smaller community, there's only some things we can do.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have to outsource to other communities. What are your strategies and goals in connecting or partnership with other communities?
Well, I guess my answer to that is we already do a lot with other communities. So, as opportunities come up, we take them. One thing that immediately comes to mind is the Dane County Cities and Villages Association, which meets monthly, and that is generally the either village presidents or mayors of all the communities. Quite often, maybe their city planner or their city administrator will be at the meetings. Also, they have different speakers at our meetings, and we also do some joint projects with them. I was on a shared services committee about a year and a half ago, where we were thinking about ways that we could share different services so not everybody has to pay for the same thing. For instance, one thing we did was set up a website where all the communities could share like standard contracts that they use for different things, like for road building or whatever, or RFPs for different types of things. And it's at least a starting point. Quite often I know when our staff are going out to write a new ordinance or come up with a contract or whatever, I mean, we look to see what other communities have done, use that as a base, and then tailor it to Monona. Obviously, we don't just copy it, but that was helpful to have kind of that database of things that people could share. We jointly funded a salary survey of a lot of different city positions, library director, police chief, whatever, because you're kind of always trying to keep everybody's salary sort of in line with other local communities, because otherwise you have other communities coming and taking your people if they're making more, can offer a higher salary or whatever. And Monona tries to stay kind of in the middle of the range for different positions, but it's very helpful to find out what other communities are paying these
Yeah.
different positions. So
Yeah.
we funded all the communities involved in DCCVA jointly funded this survey, and it took about 6 months, but
Okay.
that was very helpful a year ago when we were doing the operating budget, because we knew we had some employees that we needed to get some increases to, individual increases to kind of bring them up to the market rate. And
Yeah.
we have people who just, they're doing a great job and they
Yeah,
deserve to be
they deserve
rewarded,
it,
you
yeah.
know? So that kind of thing's real helpful. We also sponsor some Zoom programs on different topics of interest to communities. I know they've had one on road projects. This week they had one on employee retention. I wasn't able to go to that, but I asked our human resources person at City Hall if she could attend.
Yeah.
They bring in experts from wherever to do that. So
Okay.
we do a lot with DCCVA. For instance, and then there's other things like our police department is part of a training consortium with 5 other police departments
Okay.
in the Madison
Okay.
area. We work with the League of Wisconsin Municipalities, which is kind of like DCCVA on a statewide basis. They do a lot of programming for municipalities, and just have a lot of experts who can provide advice for you, that kind of thing. And things like teaching us how to advocate, giving suggestions on how to advocate for things that the city would like to see with the legislature. Like we'd all
Yeah.
like to certainly have funding increased, that kind of thing. So we do a lot jointly with them. The state is encouraging communities to look into sharing services with each other. So we've had some talks with McFarland about that. Some of these things are difficult. It's just an example. One thing, like with McFarland, if we talk about, very briefly touch on the idea of maybe sharing fire services.
Okay.
Well, because of the population they serve, they have to have fire trucks that carry water because they go to places that don't have hydrants in city. Not all. I mean,
No,
they certainly
yeah,
have hydrants,
yeah.
but they also do outlying areas. So we don't have trucks like that.
No.
They're just.
Yeah.
It isn't ever
Technicalities.
right. It's just
Yeah.
never as simple
No.
as you might think. So. One other thing, we worked with our county supervisor, Sarah Smith, in Dane
yeah, I know
County.
her.
Yeah, they gave us a $2 million grant towards the purchase of San Damiano.
Wow.
So we try to do a lot of collaborating with other communities and agencies, and we're always open to hearing from them, and we have people we reach out to too. So
Thank you for going so thorough with that answer. I really was not aware of like half of that.
yeah.
So now everyone.
I wasn't either when I started.
Yeah. So the next one is, my question is Monona in danger of neglecting any areas?
I don't really think so.
Okay.
I think in part because Monona is so small.
Yeah.
We're only like 3 square miles or
Mhm.
whatever, that you certainly are aware of every area of the city all the time.
Yeah.
So we certainly don't intentionally neglect anyone. And different, for instance, we try to make sure that we have for upgrading parks, we try to spread all those projects around at the different
Yeah.
parks. We've had a plan. The city council decided, I think like 15 years ago, to improve playground equipment and shelters at all of our parks, and they made a plan of, I don't know if it was based, I wasn't on the council or
No.
anything then, but if it was based on how old some of the equipment was or whatever, but have gradually been working through all the parks, and as you can see, we've done a lot of work on park upgrading. In terms of our roads, the Public Works Department has this, what would you call it? There's a system that they use. It's a neutral kind of a system to evaluate what shape the roads are in and determine, well, this probably can go another 2 years. You don't want the deterioration to, get too far along, because then you're damaging the road bed, and that's a lot more expensive to repair. So they go through, every year they go out and use this system of analysis to take a look at all the roads, and they have a very good idea of what roads are developing problems, and then come to me when they make their capital budget proposals, asking that funding for these different projects be put into the budget. First of 1 year, we'll have a funding for engineering to come up with a plan and determine how much it's going to be, and then the next year we put in requests for funding to actually pay for the project. That's generally how that works. and that's kind of how a lot of the park projects work too.
Okay.
But you know, so we make sure that all over the city, wherever there's a need for road repairs or, you know, that happens. So we just kind of follow where the greatest need is. We have a 5-year plan.
Okay.
And sometimes things get moved around in the 5-year
Of
plan
course.
because emergencies come up and the roof at a city building starts leaking really badly. Well, we're gonna have to fix that
Yeah.
next year instead of doing this, you
Yeah.
know, that kind of thing. And there have been a couple, you know, obviously there are some commercial places and residences that aren't in ideal condition, but
Okay.
they are private property.
Yeah.
We do have a code inspector who tries to make sure that people, you know, we have ordinances about you can't have all kinds of, for instance, all kinds of unregistered cars in your front yard, you know,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He goes around trying to make sure that we don't develop problems with different residences and commercial properties, and we'll leave them a letter of warning or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
giving them some time to clean it up. So, yeah, we do that. And then there have been a few times when there have been what were considered blighted areas where the
Okay.
city did go in and buy the property. That happened at what was Garden Circle, probably before your time.
Oh.
You're probably too
Oh,
young, but
oh.
it's where the Heritage
Oh, yes.
buildings
yes.
are now,
Yeah.
across from the post office.
Okay.
That was a very dilapidated apartment complex. Several smaller apartment buildings were having a lot of issues with crime and all kinds of problems there. So the city bought all those properties and then put out a request for proposals, and Heritage was the one that was selected to build the Heritage development. And that same thing happened down at the riverfront.
Okay.
I think there were
Yeah.
nine different properties
Got it.
involved there, and
Yeah.
it took a long time to come up with a plan for that property, but
Right.
it's been a very successful plan.
Yes, I was gonna say, sometimes slow and steady is the way to go. So my next question is regarding to housing, which you kind of briefly mentioned. With the taxes, what are your goals or plan to make sure it doesn't increase?
That we control the increases?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, first of all, you know, I just want to remind people that when you get your property tax bill, only 1/3 of that is for our city operations.
Okay.
2/3 of it, a big chunk goes to the schools,
Mm-hmm.
to Madison College,
Yeah.
and to Dane County. So we
Okay.
can only control about 1/3
Okay.
of the property tax bill. And we have state levy limits that control how much we can increase taxes for operating purposes. That's for salaries and health insurance
Okay.
and that kind of thing. So we always have to stay
Within that.
within that,
Okay.
which isn't a lot
Okay.
for a city our size, and it's getting to be a bigger problem for a lot of cities are having to go to referendum asking
Yeah.
if they can increase their operating expenses more than that is allowed for that, because like anyone else, the city has increased costs for health insurance and
Mhm.
utilities, fuel for police cars, things like that. Our employees expect to get salary increases. We have really great staff here, and we want to be sure we keep them, because to replace a department head or something it costs a lot of money over
Yeah.
time, because the whole searching for someone new, and then it takes them 6 months to a year to get really acclimated to
Yeah.
what the situation is. And so we want to keep the people we have.
Yeah.
So we try to budget very carefully. We really have a small staff for a city our size. I think it's somewhat less than 100 full-time
Wow.
equivalent. And then during the summer, we'll have a lot of part-timers,
Yeah.
like for the pool and
Yeah.
mowing lawns and all that kind of thing. But those are the people who get benefits and everything, are the
Mhm.
full-time
Yeah.
employees. So in order to give them raises, like the last couple of years, I have required all the departments to submit budgets with 0% increases, other than for personnel and things are like with utility, those kind of increases. Well, we have to pay those. We don't control
Of
those.
course.
But just other things like spending on, we'd like to send some people for continuing education things
Yeah.
occasionally, or even buying new pens, or,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I mean, they've proposed 0 increase the last couple of years, and eventually
Yeah.
that stuff catches up with you.
Yeah.
I mean, people do need ongoing training and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And so we try to do that. The main way that we can control our taxes is to increase our tax base, which is
Okay.
the amount of value, what the city is worth, all of its property. That determines what the taxes are, and if we can increase the value of all the property, then it's kind of spread out amongst more people who pay the taxes.
got
So,
it. Okay.
for example, when we did the Riverfront project, at the time that started, well, maybe a better example even would be Pier 37, because that's completed its TIF. I think when that started, I can't remember the number. That was several buildings too that we put together. I can't remember what that was worth because it was like 30 years ago, but it was I think it was somewhere between 5 and 10 million probably. Well, by the time then we have what's called a TIF.
Yeah.
Very confusing. But basically we lent money to the developer to help them make up for a gap in their financing. Then the money is paid back through the increased amount of taxes they pay because the property's so much more valuable. Then when that's all paid back, we close the TIF, and then the city and the school district and the county and all those people get their share of those increased taxes. And when that closed, it was worth like $72 million. Well, that's a lot more taxes that's generating, and that helps take some of the impact off of local property owners. That kind of thing. And the same thing eventually will happen with the Riverfront. I think that was worth $9 million when we started all the buildings there. It's already up to like $58 million or something like that within 3 years. I mean, that's pretty amazing. So
that is, wow.
So those are the main things we do. And Monona's it's kind of difficult here because development is what helps to increase your property value. And of course, people's value of their individual homes increase too. That's kind of based on what other houses are selling for in the area. But we don't have empty cornfields where we can just go out and build a Costco. Monona, it's redevelopment here, which means you're having to deal with property where there's already buildings there. And like the Riverfront, there were 9 different properties. One of them was on what's called a brownfield site because there had been a dry cleaner there years ago. So that all this contaminated ground that we had to deal with, that cost more money. Then partway through the planning, they discovered there was this giant sewer pipe that was going underneath the Chase Bank building, which we were going to build a new building there. Well, nobody wants to build a new building on top of so we had to pay to move that. And it's giant. It's as tall as me.
Wow.
Yeah. So all that kind of things involved with redevelopment, you kind of never really know what you're going to find when you start digging, and can end up costing a lot more money. So it's also just very complicated. The planning can be complicated. So
I couldn't imagine redeveloping a house, never mind parts of like land.
Right, and of course some of these buildings have been there for years, and the city doesn't even have any plans. I mean, from when they were built, what was underneath there, or so you never know.
Well, keeps
kind of like remodeling an old house.
Keeps it interesting.
It certainly does.
Okay, the next one I was gonna ask about is if you could add a new business in Monona, what would it be and where would you locate it?
Well, I think we could use probably at least one more sit-down restaurant.
Oh yeah, I like to eat. So
I mean, Monona's restaurant options have really improved over the last 10, 15 years. But maybe like an Italian restaurant or something, on Monona, somewhere on Monona Drive. That'd be awesome. I think we could use another coffee shop on Monona Drive, especially since the two of those in the area Rosie's is closed. That wasn't in Monona, but they've closed, and Java Cat also has moved. So I know I have meetings a lot of times with people in coffee shops, and there's times I go to other ones, True Coffee or whatever here, and there's nowhere to sit. So we could, I think, definitely use some more
so
there.
With that idea of adding another coffee shop on Monona Drive, even though those 2 former coffee shops haven't seemingly stayed, why do you think they haven't stayed? Or
Java Cat had to move because there's a big development going on there,
and they're in Madison, right?
Right, and so was Rosie's actually.
That's Madison.
Right, but people from Monona went there all the time. So I think there is a need for something to fill
yeah.
that space.
Yeah, no,
Um,
yeah, I
yeah,
agree. Okay,
yeah,
I was just
so.
kind of curious. Alright, and then the next one is, you already did a really good job with this, but can you just kind of describe the contributions you've, contributed towards Monona in your 3 terms so far?
Sure, I'll cover some of them, because
Oh, but yeah, no,
there's kind of a long
yeah.
list, I
Yeah.
think. I guess the big one is the purchase of San Damiano.
Okay,
I think another one is I appointed an ad hoc long-term facilities committee, because
okay,
we've got a couple of city buildings that are really the public safety facilities, which are at City Hall, police and fire, and the community center are both way beyond their natural life. They're both over 60 years old,
Yeah.
and just were designed for a different time and
yeah,
just different uses, and they're just not. Neither of them are adequate for what we need, and we need to replace the pool too.
Yeah.
So, did a study I appointed a lot of residents and some people with expertise in the field and that kind of thing. They decided we should focus on doing something about public safety facilities first. So we have come up with a plan for that, and a feasibility plan, and we'll have to see how that goes. We're going to referendum about that next year. So,
Okay.
that's been another big, long-standing project. I've done several park projects
Okay.
during my time. Wildhaven Park, which is gorgeous. I don't know if you've been there, but Schluter Beach we redid, Bridge Road, then the park at Grand Crossing at the riverfront, and now the ice skating rink, which is super popular down there. I pretty much helped lead completion of that whole riverfront project, because when I became mayor, that was still in the planning phases. Buildings hadn't been torn down, so that's all happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Those are some of the bigger ones. And then I'm still, pushing and leading our ongoing response to the diversity and equity issues.
Yeah.
And that's been just, making sure that committees are appointed, we're bringing people together, the training's happening for the staff, we're making sure that we have funding for that on the budget and that kind of thing. And, I think that's the kind of thing that it's easy to talk about for a year or two and do a report and stick it on the shelf. And,
Yeah.
we really want to make sure that we're continuing to move forward on that. So those are some of the big things. And people could go to maryformonona.com, and I've got a whole list of other accomplishments there.
Yeah,
So,
awesome. And I
yeah.
do want to mention you did carry us through a pandemic.
Oh yeah, that's right. I did. Pretty much led the city through the pandemic,
Yeah.
and then there was the flood also
Oh, yeah.
in 2018. That was a huge,
That was,
huge piece of what I did that year. So yeah, there's been
yeah.
a pandemic and a flood. Yeah, that's not what I was expecting. That's for sure.
No,
So,
but hey, you managed.
yeah, with a lot of help with a lot of other people.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, my last thing that I want to ask is, actually 2 more things, sorry. So the last, big question is, how would you assess a new project or development if it came to you?
Well, and that has happened several times. We have 4 or 5 different development projects in various stages right now. I meet very regularly with the city administrator and all the city department heads. Some of them a lot more frequently than others, just by necessity. But for instance, in terms of a project, like a development project, I just met with the city planner this morning for a couple hours. He brings me up to date on what's going on, lets me know if they've been contacted about, from someone who wants to do a project. Sometimes a developer will reach out to me, and then I put them in contact with the planner. They keep me informed on things that are coming. Lots of times I sit in on meetings with developers as well. In terms of development, we have 2 committees that both deal with development. One is the Plan Commission, and one is the CDA, the Community Development Authority. And both of them, if there's a big involved project coming, involve multiple meetings with those different committees. And I sit in on just about all those meetings if they're related to development or some kind of a big project. But I really try to stay informed. There are times when maybe staff will ask me if I could call the developer and give them a little nudge to do this or that, or the developer will call me and say, hey, what's happening with this? And, it's a collaborative
Yeah,
thing again, as so many things are at City Hall. So
yeah,
bit by bit we get them done, but
yeah.
a lot of complicated projects, and I really make a real effort to stay current on what's happening with all of them, and staff is really good on keeping me informed and letting me know if they need me to do something and whatever. So
Well, communication is key.
that is key,
Yeah.
very important. Yeah.
And then my favorite question I always love to ask is, what is your favorite part of Winona?
Okay, and you said you're talking more my
Yeah, like what your aspect.
favorite aspect of Monona.
Yeah.
I guess there's a couple things.
Okay.
First of all, and I think so many people feel this, that we kind of have all the positives of a small city and of a large urban area.
Yeah.
The location is awesome.
It is.
I worked on campus for years, and it took me literally 13 minutes to get to my office, and so I had all that. I was close to all that and all those things that campus offered too. So that's great. And then what I also like is, because of Monona's small size in some ways, it's really easy to get involved in the community, and it's really easy to get involved with various nonprofit volunteer organizations.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of that with the schools and the library before I ever ran for city council. And that's how I got to know a lot of people, and got to know, I was on the library board for years, kind of got a better idea of how the government worked and that kind of thing. So I think you can really make a difference here if you want to. And we certainly always need people to get involved, because I know people are busy, but you certainly have the ability to do it if you want to.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like the idea of, like, if you don't vote, you don't get a say. Kind of
Exactly.
like if you don't put yourself in the community, then
if you don't like how things are going, then you run for office or get on a committee and get, or just write a letter even.
Yeah.
Let us know. I'm happy to meet with whoever, whenever. So
Yeah. Perfect. And then last thing is, what is the best way for people to contact you or reach out or learn more about you?
Well, I have my campaign website, which has a lot of detail about my accomplishments and my priorities and background and that kind of thing. That's maryformonona.com. I have a Facebook page. I think that's Mary O'Connor for Mayor of Monona.
Okay.
If you go to the city website, there's I guess there's a little box at the top that says I want to.
Oh, yes.
I would say, like, contact the mayor or something like that. And there's this form that comes up
Oh, perfect.
that you can just fill in, and I get that as an email.
Okay, perfect.
Or
Easy.
call City Hall and ask them, leave a message for me or whatever. I don't have an office at City Hall.
Okay.
There is no room for a mayor's office. That's one thing we need to do something about. So, but staff always, reaches me, or will take a voicemail message and send it to me or whatever.
Alright, so there's definitely a bunch of different avenues to get to you.
Yep, we certainly do.
Perfect.
Certainly
Well,
do.
thank you so much
Well,
for
you're welcome.
doing this.
Thank you for doing this too. It's really nice of you to. I'm happy to see a young person so interested and involved. And
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Thank you.